Arsenal 1, Brentford 1. Arteta left frustrated for the third game in a row, this time at the hands of Thomas Frank. How did he do it? Were Arsenal lucky to walk away with a point, or were Brentford simply the better side? Breaking it all down next. But before we get into it, if you are feeling generous, do go ahead and like today's video. Help me get it discovered. And if you're new around here, do consider subscribing, as I'm en route to 2,500 subscribers. And your support would be greatly appreciated. But let's waste no more time at all and jump into the tactical board to see what happened on the day. So as we can see here, Arsenal on the left-hand side setting up when in possession and predominantly in the opponent's half in that 2-3-5 formation, something that we've seen for the last 18 to 24 months from this Arteta Arsenal. And then Brentford, although prior to the game kicking off, on paper, it was down as a 4-3-3. When they were out of possession, when they were looking to frustrate Arsenal, it was very much a 5-3-2. Very compact, very narrow, not much space between the lines at all. But the biggest workhorses in this Brentford side was in transition. And this was Henry here getting up and down that left-hand side. Not only was he a left back, he was a left winger. And he was getting right up in to Arsenal's final third. And exactly the same with Brentford's right wing back as well. So absolute workhorses. But Brentford, as the game progressed, both in the first as well as the second half, until they were chasing the game 1-0 down, their back five were very much slowly being pushed further and further and further back. And what we did see was quite literally Brentford set up like this. Absolutely no space between the lines for the likes of Nketiah, Odegaard, who likes to operate in these particular areas as well. Saka out on the left, of course. Martinelli on the left, Saka on the right. Xhaka in here, sometimes swapping with Zinchenko. All the usual bits and pieces that we've come to familiarize ourselves with on this channel. Now, there were some differences in the way it was set up. They weren't set up in the way that Newcastle or Everton frustrated Arsenal. They had 5 in midfield, but there were similar triggers, if you will, that really stopped Arsenal from playing until we got that goal. And you could see where Arsenal were looking to exploit the space and get in behind Brentford. Now, more often than not, since Jesus has been injured, we've seen Martinelli playing high and wide. But in this particular game, we did see him coming inside a little bit more often, operating as a false nine, looking to overload on that final line as well, and making sure that there were no situations like there were in the Everton game where we were getting boxed out of the midfield. Now, what this did mean is that we saw the likes of Zinchenko or Xhaka in some cases playing a little bit more wider than we've usually seen in previous weeks. Now, don't get me wrong, Martinelli wasn't always in this 9 role, shall we say. He was still quite often out here. And when that was happening, we saw Xhaka and Zinchenko taking up those typical roles in that left half space. Now, where Arsenal were left frustrated, and this was happening on both the left and the right-hand sides, they were being doubled up again. Now, what I didn't like from an Arsenal point of view is that if we look at how Arsenal were being doubled up, Saka here, Martinelli on the left, there was no, I wouldn't say plan B, but what would be a solution here, especially on the left-hand side, is Kieran Tierney is more of a sort of an out-and-out wing-back as opposed to what Zinchenko offers. He would be getting beyond Martinelli, maybe dragging one of these players out, making it fair numbers when running at the opposition, for example. But we didn't see that. Now, we did see Ben White get beyond Saka a little bit more often in this game. But having been a centre-back for the majority of his career and only recently sort of transitioning into a right-back, if you will, even Tomiyasu to some extent coming on, if that were to be the case, they're not the type of right-backs that are going to always, for 90-plus minutes, constantly get beyond Saka on this right-hand side. He's more often offering support in this particular role. And then what happened is because they were playing free at the back, if Xhaka was coming into this space here, what you would find is we've got a player here to mark Xhaka, and likewise with Odegaard here. So it was like for like, essentially. And we've got Norgard. When Partey was looking to control the game from midfield in here, there was that immediate press. So it's very, very frustrating for Arsenal. And yes, whilst we did get that goal, which we'll look at in just a moment. It was that shape. Got a cracking picture here to show you that back five of Brentford, and you can see just in front of them the three midfield players, absolutely no space whatsoever for Arsenal to operate in. And Mbeumo would sometimes kind of drop into midfield to create a few more numbers in there, so they weren't necessarily overloaded. But Mbeumo and Toney were constantly looking to hit Arsenal on the counter-attack, bringing us to, well, how Brentford would set up, not only when pressing Arsenal, when Arsenal were looking to build from the back. Arsenal would typically set up in their usual 4-4-2 formation, of course, so that if they did win the ball back, they could spring their usual counter-attack into their five, for example. But what we did see is Brentford playing their usual three at the back, so they've got good control. And we would see this particular setup from Brentford. It would be a front four, so they're matching Arsenal up like for like at the back. And then if the ball was to come out to this side, Janssen would come out here and provide support to double up. That means it would push Saka back, and likewise on this side, pushing Martinelli back as well. And we'd have Norgard in here, and then we'd have Ben Mee, Pinnock, and Ajer. And that would be the typical way that they would attack. Now, when Arsenal were looking to build from the back, maybe Saka out here, Ben Mee a bit further back, for example, what we would see is these front four players looking to press Arsenal. And I'll give you a great example of what I mean by this here. Now, whilst this is a picture of Brentford in attack, we can see those four Brentford players aligned with the four Arsenal defenders, for example. And whilst I said this is a picture of them in possession, and they created some great opportunities in the first half, this was exactly the same like-for-like matchup when Arsenal were building from the back. When Ramsdale had the ball at his feet and he was looking to go to a Ben White or a Saliba, it would be these players that were looking to match up with Arsenal. Now, it wouldn't necessarily be the wing-backs providing that press. It would be the likes of Jensen or Janelt providing that press, depending if it was on the left or the right-hand side, if it was going to a White or a Zinchenko, for example. But it was always a 4v4 situation in that particular press. And where Arsenal finally managed to grab some luck, if you will, great picture here. We can see again that Brentford are lined up in their typical five at the back. When I mentioned as the game progressed, this was quite late on in the second half, they'd constantly pressed and pushed Brentford further and further and further back to the point where they were such a compact unit that Arsenal only really had the width to try and get in and behind Brentford. And this is a typical example where there was just enough of a gap where Saka had lost his man and he could get a ball straight across the face of that 6-yard box and goal, with Trossard lurking at the back post, not being picked up by his man. And this was certainly the plan from Arsenal throughout the entirety of the game. I think there have been games earlier on in the season where Arteta and Arsenal have shown some real serious patience, for example, and it's paid off, and Arsenal have gone on to win 2, 3, 4 goals, for example. And it did feel like at times that once this ball did hit the back of the net, that we could potentially go on and maybe get another one. But it was a game of chess. And then not too long after Arsenal scored, Brentford managed to nick one back. Arsenal being a little bit more reserved, shall we say, having got the goal, not needing to sort of push for it as much, not needing to go for it as much. And there were massive, massive question marks as to whether this particular instance, the header here we can see from number 5 in towards that 6-yard box, was the player offside. Now, Toney, who eventually receives the ball from the other side of the 6-yard box, he's not in an offside position when he receives the ball. The big question here is whether or not number 5, when he heads the ball down, is it offside? Now, yes, it did go to VAR. There was a good check there, a good while for it to be checked, and it was obviously given as a goal. But I've seen a lot of speculation on social media as to whether or not it should have been given or not. So I'd love to hear from Arsenal fans, Brentford fans, or neutrals, depending on who's watching. Do you think this was the right decision? If it was, tell me why. If it wasn't, also tell me why. So lots and lots to digest in this game. My biggest concern here moving forwards is this is 3 games on the bounce now where Arsenal have been left frustrated by opposition tactics. And more often than not, with Arsenal looking to hurt teams always out wide, and we've not always doubled up out wide with your typical wing backs, for example. Teams are starting to cotton onto it a little bit more. They're playing 2 low blocks, whether it's a 5 at the back, a 4 at the back, a 4 in midfield, a 5 in midfield, whatever the situation may be, it's 2 low blocks with not very much space in between those lines. And with Man City coming up, it's going to be a much more open game with Arsenal having a lot more space to run in behind. It'll be a very different tactical battle compared to the 3 we've just had. But when we're playing against these mid-table teams or the teams in the sort of lower parts of the table, Arteta may need to kind of rethink a strategy or have a plan B in order to take these teams down. And whilst we did get a goal through showing patience today, that isn't always going to be the case. Now, I'm not quite at the stage where I'm hitting my panic button yet. I do think that there's plenty of football to play for Arsenal to show why we could potentially be champions, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, as you probably noticed, no man of the match graph or graphic for you guys to look at today. So let me know down in the comments below, if there was an Arsenal man of the match, who would it be? Let me know down below. I hope you have found today's video informative. If you have done, do drop a like. If you're new around here, subscribe. But for now, I'm JC, and I'll catch you in the next one. And boy, is it a big one. So make sure you're subscribed, as you won't want to miss out. Take care and stay safe.